začetni predstavljalec bo Tine Kolenik. Naslov prispevka pa je The State of the Integrated Information Theory, its boundary cases and the question of key consciousness, AI.
Okay, hi, I've presented once today already, so some of you may know me. I'm Tine Kolenik, and yeah, I'm going to be presenting a certain theory of consciousness that the co-author and me believe is probably the most important for AI so far because it's so mathematically and formally described. We will describe what are its boundary cases and how you can determine consciousness in them, and then connect it to AI. So I will, of course, introduce the topic a bit more, tell you of the theory itself, what tools we have to determine and to work with it, and the work we did for this study, and what problems we had, or what problems the theory has in general. We will then connect it to, or I will connect it to the artificial intelligence. We will talk about the hypothesis on how AI can achieve better score, better consciousness level, according to the theory, offer the analysis for this hypothesis, and then some concluding thoughts and our future work. So consciousness, it's a huge term. It's so indescribable, but at the same time, we all kind of internally feel what consciousness should be because it's so intimate. And there are numerous theories on what consciousness is, from very pseudoscientific to more scientific, predictable, scientifically formally describable, and so on. And some of the most well-received recent theories, according to a meta paper from 2018, I think, is the global workspace theory, the multiple drafts model, the predictive coding approaches. These are especially hot right now in cognitive science, and I think that in neuroscience, the authors of these approaches are the most cited. Quantum theories of consciousness are also very popular, but all of these kind of struggle with a similar problem. One thing is that they don't have the tools yet or the formal description so that they can be predict phenomena. That is one thing. So it's hard. They are hard to falsify, and also their connection to AI in this way is a bit more strained. Maybe only the predictive coding approaches are more can be integrated with AI. So the theory we describe here is the integrated information theory by Giulio Tononi, who is a neuroscientist and a sleep researcher. And this theory has been described as the most formally sound, especially because it operates with very clear mathematical formulas and predictions. So what is this integrated information theory? It operates with a concept known as phi, and this phi describes the amount of integrated information which should be closely correlated with a level of consciousness. And this integrated information, so there are two parts to it. One is the information, so how much of information one system has about itself, and the integration part, so how much is this information integrated, so how much it depends on the interconnectedness of the system itself. And if this system would somehow fall apart, how information would then behave in such a system. And this phi is said that it can be calculated for any given system. Which is kind of similar to panpsychism, which says that each and every entity and object has a certain level of consciousness, because even here, for some very suspicious cases, for example, a light switch, this phi can be calculated to be positive. And I will there's this connection to the hard question of consciousness, as always, but Tononi kind of bypasses it with what we'll see later on. So why is this theory special? In a way, because it can predict certain phenomena. So for example, one is, why is the cerebral cortex the one that gives rise to consciousness and not the cerebellum, which has 4 times more neurons? And for example, what is important for consciousness in cases where experience is not immediately accessible, for example, in various patients and in infants, in animals who can't report experience, and in machines. So there are 5 axioms and 5 postulates of this theory, which kind of describe what kind of systems have consciousness. So there is intrinsic experience, where the axiom is that consciousness is real, and it's real from its own perspective. So this kind of bypasses the hard problem of consciousness. And the postulate is that the system, so the physical substrate of consciousness, has to have cause-effect power upon itself. Then the second concept is composition, and the axiom is that consciousness is composed of various phenomenological distinctions which exist within it. And so the physical substrate has to be such that it has to be composed of elements that have cause-effect power upon the system. Then the information aspect I have kind of talked about. So the axiom is that consciousness and each experience is specific and thus differing from other possible experiences. So you can't have 2 experiences at once that are the same. And the postulate, so the physical substrate, the system has to possess cause-effect sets that differ from each other in this space of possibilities of how system can act. And then integration, consciousness, the axiom is that consciousness is unified and experience is irreducible to a certain set of its phenomenological distinctions. But this only means that the system must specify its cause-effect structure as to be unified. So the phi of the system, this integrated information of the system, has to be larger than the sum of its parts. So, which is basically emergence. And the exclusion part is a play on the integration part. So the axiom is that consciousness and experiences are definite, and that this means that the phi of the system has to be bigger than phi or phi of any given subsystem. So consciousness is, so what this means is basically that if you are a human being, your atom, one atom, or any sub-part of you must not have higher level of consciousness, going by this theory, than you as a whole system. So the newest tool to calculate phi is PyPhi. It's a Python library, and it tries to they try to correct more and more for the problem of phi not being able to be calculated with our current computational technologies. This is the algorithm's running time, and it's huge, as you can see. It's exponential. And we did an experiment, and for a system with 3 nodes, it takes 8 seconds with this kind of system, this kind of computer. And as soon as we have 7 nodes, for example, it takes 24 hours. And I know that there are some other researchers that did it with supercomputers, and they still spent a huge amount of time to calculate phi, so consciousness level, for like 10 node systems and so on. So that's a huge problem. So our hypothesis is this. So there are expert systems in AI which are based on structured and semantical data, and then we have neural networks that are based on big data. And our hypothesis is that Shoam, this is a researcher, he says that if you combine these 2 approaches, you would get a more intelligent AI. And so our hypothesis is, if we were to do this, combine old and new artificial intelligence, it would score higher on the consciousness, on the phi level. This is our hypothesis. And I'll go quickly through this. So we went through each axiom and postulate. We tried to see if it's true or if it's not true for each of these AI approaches, and then we just took we took the OR argument to see if it's true for the combined AI. I will go through this quickly, but basically each of these axioms was true except for the exclusion part. So we cannot guarantee yet that a smaller part of an AI system will have smaller consciousness or smaller phi than the whole system. So in this regard, the axioms cannot be yet accounted for in AI. So yeah, these are some more problems of Tononi with AI, but our conclusions are that AI can achieve bigger phi according to this theory, especially according to Schoam, who says that if you combine all the new AI, it will be more intelligent. But we have to calculate that to be sure, and the calculations, as you have seen, are impossible. So our future work will include using some AI methods to maybe shorten the time for calculating phi with some heuristics, which is already a path that some researchers take in regards to this theory. And yeah, we want to calculate phi then to confirm it mathematically, not only analytically through analyzing axioms. And some more ideas, we want to calculate phi for example, two Turing machines that are interconnected with loops, and see if the phi is higher than combining two individual Turing machines. And these are my references. So thanks.
Okay. Questions? Yeah.
What is the intuition behind the time complexity of this algorithm? What does n stand for exactly? Because it's n 53 to the power of n. It's quite extreme.
Yeah, it's really exponential. Okay, so there's this paper that describes this algorithm and why, well, in its full, but it's written by like hardcore mathematicians, and I wasn't able to understand why the exponentials are so high.
Okay, do you have an intuition what n is here? Like size of what? Because n is typically the size of the
node in the system.
Okay.
Sorry, yeah.
And what is this node in the system?
Node in the system, it's basically anything that can have input and output. So it's like a node in a neural network, for example.
Do you calculate this for 7 nodes in a neural network or something else?
Yeah, it can be 7 nodes in a neural network, or some logical gates, or basically they are looping the system through various recursion formulas, and that's how they calculate it. Yeah, I am not able, I haven't been able to understand it yet, but we are working on it.
Some other questions? Yeah.
Do you by any chance share the sentiment of many IIT proponents, like the Pensakis sentiment and so forth? Do you share this metaphysical?
Yeah, that's a hard one, actually.
Like
I don't think that, well, I have a problem with saying that the problem is that they haven't defined consciousness precise enough to justify them saying that there is a scale of consciousness, because I have no idea what that would mean, and they haven't defined it. So I'm wary of that, because they say that, you know, this phi score kind of correlates with the scale of consciousness. You can talk about more complex systems in biological way. Humans are more complex than amoebas. But what does this mean in consciousness terms? So I'm wary of that. But they basically say that you have, the system has more possibilities to act upon itself. So more yeah, that's one of the definitions, which is kind of cool, but yeah.
Zdaj smo prišli pa še do zadnjega prispevka. Prispevek, ki se ga pripravlja Alen Lipuš in Alen Establishing Illusionism, in bomo poslušali iz nekaj sekund.
Takoj. Aha, okej. Okej. Prosim. Cool. Okay. Okay. Hello, I'm from Maribor. I'm Alen. Janis is not here with us. Basically, this is an expert from my dissertation, which is still in the making, and Professor Bregan helped me with it. So, first I would like to introduce you to the what I think is the contemporary status of the debate regarding the nature of consciousness. So, basically, in philosophy of mind, of course. There won't be any technical things, and I hope maybe since I have trouble understanding illusionism, some of you might help me with it. So, the basic thing is that scientific worldview is inconsistent with the reality of consciousness. You have this placement problem. How do we place this rich inner experiencing consciousness, phenomenal consciousness, into our naturalistic picture? So when I will be talking about or mentioning consciousness, keep in mind that I'm not mentioning anything like subpersonal systems, access consciousness, so forth. I'm mentioning phenomenal or ordinary pre-theoretical notion of how it is like, what is it like. Some of you know the term qualia, and so forth. So I'll be talking about phenomenal consciousness. So basically, you have in the contemporary debate, you have these two camps. Before, you had the third camp, but the third camp shrank by a large amount. So the third camp was compatibilists. They were like philosophers who were physicalists, and they wanted to say, well, we want to have mental events as real, as ontologically real, but at the same time, we are quite optimistic that we can place them into the naturalistic framework. The main strategy of those compatibilists were phenomenal concepts theory and so forth, but in recent times, due to the increase of, let's say, the theory, integrated information theory and its panpsychist consequences, you have the first school who says that, okay, if consciousness is inconsistent with the scientific worldview must change. So the metaphysics, the physicalism, everything is physical. This picture that science paints must change. We must somehow modify the metaphysical framework in order to accommodate these special features of consciousness. We can call, in general terms, these types of philosophers and scientists inflationists. So the second answer to the dilemma, to the problematic statement is that consciousness must change. We must revise what consciousness is in order to accommodate it in our current understanding of the world. So we have deflationism here, but the main theory I wanted to focus on is illusionism. So this is just, we won't be reading everything, this is just the exchange between two philosophers who are from one of the camps. So the first one is Galen Strawson, who is from the camp of
scientific story must change. And the second one is the Daniel Dennett, who is proto-illusionist. He basically started this whole thing. So I just wanted to point out that one of my points in the dissertation is that there is something really strange going on if you have philosophers who don't even agree at the starting point. And you see here, Strawson, when he tries to describe Dennett and other philosophers who go into the second camp, says that they deny the existence of consciousness. On the other hand, Dennett is saying that this is a misrepresentation of his claim. And Strawson then says, deniers, consciousness deniers, say that although it seems that there is conscious experience, there isn't really any conscious experience. And then it goes on to say, we say consciousness seem, when we reflect upon the point, to involve being directly acquainted, and so forth and so forth. So you have this tension at the very starting point. The question, what is consciousness? What does it mean to be conscious, to have feelings, to have experience, and so forth? They are really in tension with each other. So Galen Strawson then concludes that Dennett and others, if they are right, nobody has really suffered and so forth. And of course this is not true. What they only mean is that when they are talking, Dennett and so forth, talking about consciousness, they are just not talking about consciousness like Strawson would like. So let me just then go to describe these few bullet points. And so the first camp, the inflationists, think that there is no appearance-reality distinction when we are talking about consciousness. Of course, we have appearance-reality distinction when we're talking about things in the world. A table has an appearance, but this does not necessarily translate to the table is as such as it appears. But if I feel pain, there is no appearance-reality distinction. If I feel pain, I must be in pain, or if I see red, I must see red. As long as I don't extrapolate this visual experience to outer world, I cannot be mistaken. And if it seems to me that I am under the impression of visual representation of red, then I am under such state. And they also say that our ordinary pre-theoretical phenomenal concepts get the world exactly right. They are revelatory. And they also say consciousness is a given, is a datum. We must make no revisions to consciousness. And you have these metaphysical theories that sprout out of these types of things, like panpsychism, cosmopsychism, idealism, and basically all of them are based on the so-called Russellian monism. So you have philosophers like Strawson, Chalmers, Mork, and Goethe. And on the other side, you have illusionism, I think one of the main theories in physicalist dealings with consciousness. So they will try to say that there is an appearance-reality distinction when we are talking about consciousness. So it's a representational theory. Seemings are fictional, and our ordinary pre-theoretical concepts are not right. We must revise consciousness in order to fit it in our worldview. And you have Dennett, Graziano, Pereboom, and Frankish as one of the main contemporary articulators and proponents of illusionism. So basically what illusionism is, illusionism says that although we are conscious, the phenomenal aspect of consciousness is an illusion. There is no such thing as a phenomenal property to a conscious system. They say this because, of course, they want to avoid a hard problem. They kind of, physicalists, figured out that as soon as you mention phenomenality or phenomenal properties, there is no way out of it. You can't have your cake and eat it too. So if you want to talk about qualia as a real properties, there is no way you can remain a physicalist. And they replace the hard problem with the illusion problem, and there is also something called illusion meter problem. So how do we get to illusionism? Well, first we recognize that phenomenality is or seems anomalous to the scientific, physicalist, naturalistic framework. And we are somehow committed to explanatory strategy that relies on existing theoretical resources, and we don't want to make a radical theoretical revisions to them. So this equals to the conclusion that phenomenality does not exist or is an illusion. Because if we put in, instead of phenomenality, let's say telekinesis is anomalous, or telepathy is anomalous, the same thing would follow. You would get to the telepathy or telekinesis is an illusion. So this is a standard explanatory approach from the science, that when you have some anomalous phenomena, you explain it away as an illusion, and then you explain the mechanisms that generate this illusion. So, okay, I must go forward. So they just replace the hard problem of consciousness that states, why does the brain activity give rise to rich inner experiencing, to why do we think we have rich inner lives? What are those models that generate our illusions of having a rich inner lives? And the illusion meter problem is just a question, why is it so hard to accept that our rich inner lives are illusionary? My simple answer is that it's the same as we cannot unsee optical illusions. So we cannot unbelieve that we are that our rich inner lives are just illusions. So this is my part. I think that illusionism is not coherent, because how does the illusionist, so this theoretical person, know that phenomenality is anomalous? Because I think that there is only positive conception of phenomenality. You can't have a third-person account of phenomenality. That's the point of phenomenality. It's first-person experience. So only positive first-person concept acquisition counts. And when I asked Professor Frankish this when I was visiting on Crete, where he works now, his reply was, well, you can justify the denial of phenomenality like you can do it with God, souls, magic, blah, 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 via negativa. To have sufficient, albeit negative conception of it is enough for us to deny and to talk meaningful about phenomenality. But my intuition and my point is that if negative conception would be enough, then we would not be talking about the hard problem in the first place. Phenomenality would not be such an anomaly for physicalism. So basically, this is something I call pre-illusion problem. So it is quite paradoxical to be justified in denying phenomenality. Phenomenality must exist. Otherwise, you cannot meaningfully talk about it. So how can you expect someone that never tasted pineapple to talk about the taste of pineapple? No way. You have to have a first-person experience in order to meaningfully talk about it. And to deny something is to meaningfully talk about it. Therefore, it seems that illusionists are somehow caught in this weird conceptual conundrum. And I think there is no negative way to its anomalous nature, because its anomalous nature is to have to be first-person revelatory, not just secondary descriptions or third-person descriptions. So if illusionism is not coherent as it is now established, no wonder we are reluctant to accept it. And this is the answer to the meta problem. So when people think, well, why is it so hard to accept that consciousness is an illusion? Well, one of the answers is that if it's not coherently established as it is, no wonder we are reluctant to accept it. So that's it. Thank you.
So in this last slide, you say that if you do not experience something, you cannot talk meaningfully about it.
But this something must be like something phenomenal, not like thunder or like.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So this works for any such phenomenal concept, but you are talking about people. So how can you talk about others' for example, people like about people like Dennett, if you haven't experienced what he's experiencing about this problem, do you understand?
Yeah, but this presupposes that his theoretical attitude towards this problem is phenomenal, has a phenomenal
Yeah.
quality.
Yeah, of course.
I would argue that it does not. Okay? Well,
Okay.
of course, there are some schools of thought or projects who want, like cognitive phenomenology and so forth, who want to say that phenomenal states are dispersed. There is not just reserved for certain aspects, but you have like this, when you think about something, it has a phenomenal component. So we would just have to agree to disagree, like we cannot
Whatever
move forward.
position.
I would just say, well, his theoretical propositional attitude toward the problem is not something phenomenal. Therefore, I don't need to justify this, my critique with phenomenal experience.
Okay. Explain the way.
Yeah. But I just want to point out, just because this just seems, if we just go back to this Frankish and me, this can go nowhere. And this is the state of the, I think, current theoretical deliberations in philosophy regarding consciousness. Because he thinks it's okay, we can ascribe it negatively. I think we cannot, and we cannot move forward. And therefore, this, between these two camps, there is no discussion. There cannot be any discussion because you have, like you said, axiom 1 from IIT, consciousness is real. The second camp will say, no, it's not. End of the debate. You cannot have, and this is problematic. I want to illustrate and articulate this tension, and illusionism is just one of the part of the problem, I would say. Yeah, just sorry.
Okay. More questions? If not, then thanks to the speaker last year